Your words are worthless. And increasing the volume doesn't increase the value. Every day you show up to work and participate in the same self-sabotaging ritual that's plagued your career for years. Someone presents an idea and you immediately point out the flaws. A problem arises and you rush to offer solutions. A pause occurs in conversation and you fill it with observations nobody needed. You think you're being helpful, engaged, contributing. You're actually training everyone around you to tune you out. The harsh mathematics of influence work like this. The more you talk, the less each word is worth. The more opinions you offer, the less any single opinion matters. The more you react, the less thoughtful you appear. Meanwhile, there's someone in your organization who speaks half as much as you do and wields twice the influence. They're not more talented, they're not more connected. They've simply understood that in an economy of attention, scarcity creates value, and your constant availability has made you cheap. The most successful leaders in the world share one characteristic that nobody talks about. It's not charisma, it's not confidence, it's not even intelligence. It's their ability to remain silent when everyone else feels compelled to speak. Look around any corporate office, any business meeting, any negotiation table, and you'll notice something fascinating. The person commanding the most respect, the individual wielding the most influence, is rarely the one dominating the conversation. They're the one sitting back, observing, processing, and choosing their words with surgical precision. Most people have this completely backwards. They believe leadership means having all the answers immediately. They think influence comes from being the loudest voice in the room. They've convinced themselves that silence equals weakness, that pauses mean uncertainty, that holding back their opinions makes them invisible. This couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, this misconception is exactly what keeps average performers stuck at average levels, while true leaders rise to the top. Here's what actually happens in the real world of business and leadership when you speak less. Your words carry more weight. It's basic economics applied to communication. Scarcity creates value. When you're not constantly filling every silence with your opinions, observations, and commentaries, something remarkable occurs. People start leaning forward when you do speak. They pay attention. They take notes. They remember what you said because you don't say much, which means when you do open your mouth, it matters. Think about the most expensive luxury brands in the world. They don't advertise on every billboard. They don't send you emails every single day. They don't desperately seek your attention. Their restraint, their selectivity, their silence creates mystique and value. Your words work exactly the same way. Every time you jump into a conversation with an unnecessary comment, you're devaluing your communication currency. Every time you fill an uncomfortable silence just because it feels awkward, you're training people to ignore you. The psychological impact of strategic silence is profound. When you pause before responding, even for just 3 seconds, you communicate several powerful messages simultaneously. First, you're showing that you actually think before you speak, which immediately separates you from 90% of the population who react on impulse. Second, you're demonstrating emotional control, which is the cornerstone of executive presence. Third, you're forcing the other person to sit in that silence with you, which creates a subtle but unmistakable power dynamic. They spoke, you're considering. They're waiting for your judgment. You've just positioned yourself as the authority without saying a single word. In negotiation settings, this principle becomes even more critical. The first person to speak after a proposal is made almost always loses ground. Why? Because breaking the silence reveals discomfort, and discomfort reveals weakness. When you put an offer on the table and then sit back in complete silence, you're forcing the other party to react. You're gathering information about their position, their confidence level, their desperation or lack thereof. They might counter immediately, revealing they were prepared to give more. They might fumble for words, showing uncertainty. They might rush to fill the silence with justifications, handing you leverage you didn't even ask for. But here's where most people struggle. Silence feels uncomfortable. Your brain starts screaming at you to say something, anything, to ease the tension. You feel pressure to prove you're engaged, to show you're smart, to demonstrate value. This is exactly the trap you must avoid. That discomfort you're feeling, the other person feels it 10 times worse because they're waiting for your response. Your comfort with silence makes them uncomfortable, and that discomfort works entirely in your favor. Consider what happens in team meetings. There's always someone who talks constantly. They comment on everything. They repeat points that have already been made. They think out loud. They fill every pause. Does anyone respect this person? Does anyone seek their opinion? Rarely. Instead, people tune them out. Their words become background noise. Now contrast this with the team member who speaks only when they have something substantial to contribute. When they raise their hand or lean forward, the entire room shifts attention. Why? Because experience has taught everyone that when this person speaks, it's worth hearing. The same dynamic plays out in crisis situations. When problems arise, when pressure mounts, when chaos threatens to take over. Weak leaders panic and start talking. They issue rapid-fire instructions. They think out loud. They change directions every few minutes. They mistake activity for progress and noise for leadership. Strong leaders do the opposite. They get quiet, they observe, they gather information. They let others exhaust their panic while they maintain composure. Then, when they've fully assessed the situation, they speak with clarity and direction. Their silence during the chaos made their eventual words powerful enough to cut through all the noise. This isn't about being withdrawn or passive. Strategic silence is active, engaged, and purposeful. You're not checking out of conversations. You're fully present, listening at the deepest level, watching body language, noting what people aren't saying, identifying patterns and inconsistencies. You're absorbing everything while revealing nothing until you choose to. That's power. That's leadership. That's the advantage everyone else is giving away by talking too much. Your words should be like a master craftsman's tools, brought out only when needed, used with precision, then put away. When you speak, people should know you've thought it through. They should understand that your silence wasn't emptiness, but preparation. They should recognize that you're not someone who needs to hear themselves talk, which automatically makes you someone worth listening to. This is how you build authority without demanding it. This is how you command respect without requiring it. This is how silence makes you a leader. Your ability to lead others is directly connected to your ability to lead yourself. And nothing tests self-leadership more than those moments when every fiber of your being wants to react immediately. Someone criticizes your work. A colleague takes credit for your idea. Your boss questions your judgment in front of the team. In these moments, your natural impulse screams at you to defend, to correct, to fight back instantly. This impulse has destroyed more careers than any other single factor. The leaders who rise to the top have learned something that average performers never grasp. They've mastered the space between what happens to them and how they respond. There's a 3-second rule that separates professionals from amateurs. When something triggers you emotionally, when you feel that surge of anger or frustration or the desperate need to prove yourself right, you count to 3 before you open your mouth. 3 seconds, that's all it takes to shift from reactive to responsive. In those 3 seconds, your prefrontal cortex catches up with your amygdala. Your thinking brain overrides your emotional brain. You move from automatic to intentional. This tiny pause is the difference between saying something you'll regret for years and saying something that elevates your reputation. But most people can't do it. They're so afraid of looking weak, so terrified of letting something slide, so convinced that immediate response equals strength that they sabotage themselves repeatedly. They send emails in anger, they snap back in meetings, they defend themselves before anyone has even finished speaking. Then they wonder why people don't trust them with bigger responsibilities. They question why they're passed over for promotion. They can't understand why their teams walk on eggshells around them. The answer is simple. They've demonstrated over and over that they can't control themselves. So why would anyone believe they can control a department or a division or a company? Let me tell you about a vice president named Thomas who learned this lesson the hard way. He was brilliant, hardworking, and absolutely terrible at managing his reactions in meetings. If someone questioned his department's results, he'd immediately launch into defensive explanations. If a colleague suggested a different approach, he'd list 10 reasons why that wouldn't work before they'd finish their sentence. If his boss expressed concern about a project, Thomas would interrupt with justifications and excuses. He thought he was showing competence. He believed he was protecting his reputation. In reality, he was advertising his insecurity to everyone in the room. His career had plateaued. Despite his technical skills and work ethic, he kept getting passed over for senior roles. Then one day, his mentor gave him brutally honest feedback. Nobody trusted him in high-pressure situations because he couldn't handle even low-pressure conversations without becoming defensive. The mentor gave him a simple assignment. For the next 30 days, he was not allowed to respond immediately to any criticism, question, or challenge. He had to pause, acknowledge what was said, and tell people he'd think about it and get back to them. The first week was torture for Thomas. His ego screamed at him. Every pause felt like an admission of weakness. He was convinced people would think he didn't know his job, but he stuck with it. He'd hear criticism, and instead of defending, he'd say, "That's a fair point, let me consider that and follow up with you tomorrow." Someone would question his approach, and he'd respond, "I appreciate that perspective. Give me some time to think through what you've said." It felt completely unnatural. It went against every instinct he had. By week 3, something shifted. His team members started opening up to him more because they weren't afraid of his defensive reactions. His peers began seeking his input because he'd stopped treating every conversation like a debate he had to win. His boss started giving him more candid feedback because Thomas had proven he could hear it without melting down. By the end of 90 days, Thomas had been offered the senior role he'd been chasing for 3 years. The promotion wasn't because he'd suddenly become smarter or more skilled. It was because he'd finally learned to control his reactions through the power of strategic silence. This principle applies to every interaction you have. When someone says something that triggers you, your silence serves multiple purposes. First, it prevents you from saying something you'll regret. Second, it gives you time to understand what's really being said versus what you initially heard through your emotional filter. Third, it demonstrates to everyone watching that you're someone who thinks before responding. Fourth, it often causes the other person to keep talking, revealing more information that helps you understand the real issue. The phrase, "let me think about that," is one of the most powerful tools in your leadership arsenal. It buys you time. It shows respect for the complexity of the issue. It prevents you from making commitments you haven't fully considered. It signals that you're someone who takes things seriously rather than shooting from the hip. Yet most people are terrified to use it because they think it makes them look indecisive or uninformed. The opposite is true. Leaders who need time to think are respected. Leaders who have instant answers to everything are viewed with suspicion. Your emotional regulation is constantly being tested in the workplace. Every day presents situations that could trigger reactive responses. The key is recognizing that between every stimulus and your response, there's a space. In that space lies your power. When you fill that space with silence instead of immediate reaction, you're exercising the highest form of self-control. You're proving that you can be trusted with greater responsibilities because you've shown you can be trusted with your own emotions. This is what separates managers from leaders. This is what determines who gets the corner office and who stays stuck in middle management. This is how silence transforms you from someone who reacts to circumstances into someone who shapes them. The moment you step into any leadership role, you enter a completely different game with completely different rules. What got you promoted will not keep you successful. Individual contributors succeed by having answers. Leaders succeed by drawing answers out of others. Individual contributors prove their value by speaking up. Leaders prove their value by creating space for others to step up. This shift is where most new leaders fail. They keep playing the old game, dominating discussions, solving every problem themselves, being the smartest person in every conversation. Then they wonder why their teams underperform and why they're overwhelmed with work. Walk into any meeting and you can immediately identify who understands leadership and who doesn't. The person who doesn't understand it jumps in early. They set the agenda verbally, even if there's already an agenda. They offer opinions before hearing from others. They interrupt with solutions before problems are fully explained. They think they're adding value. They believe they're demonstrating competence. Actually, they're doing the opposite. They're training their team to be passive. They're teaching everyone that their role is to sit back and let the leader do the thinking. They're creating dependency instead of capability. Now watch the person who truly understands leadership. They open the meeting and then they shut up. They ask a question and wait. They let silence hang in the air until someone fills it. When someone speaks, they listen completely before responding. When a problem gets presented, they don't immediately solve it. Instead, they ask, "What do you think we should do?" Then they wait again. They're comfortable with long pauses. They don't rescue people from the discomfort of having to think. This approach feels risky to new leaders. They worry their team will think they don't know the answer. Here's the truth. Your team already knows you probably have an answer. What they're learning is whether you'll let them develop their own answers. Strategic silence in meetings accomplishes something remarkable. It forces your team members to engage their critical thinking instead of their note-taking. When you solve every problem, your team becomes a group of scribes writing down your decisions. When you stay silent and facilitate discussion, your team becomes a group of thinkers developing solutions. Which team is more valuable? Which team can function when you're not in the room? Which team prepares people for their own leadership roles? The same principle applies when you're speaking last instead of first. Less experienced leaders feel compelled to establish their position immediately. They think leadership means having the answer before anyone else. Skilled leaders do the opposite. They let everyone else speak first. They gather all perspectives. They note who thinks what and why. They identify alignments and conflicts. Then, after everyone has committed to a position, they speak. By going last, they've collected maximum information while revealing minimum bias. Their eventual input carries more weight because it's informed by everything that came before it. Conflict situations reveal the true power of leadership silence. Picture this scenario. Two of your team members are in a heated disagreement. Both are talking over each other. Emotions are running high. The weak leader jumps in immediately, picking a side or proposing a compromise that nobody wants. The strong leader does something completely different. They let it play out. They sit back and watch. They let both parties fully express their positions. They let the emotion exhaust itself. This takes enormous discipline because every instinct tells you to intervene, to smooth things over, to make peace. But here's what happens when you resist that urge. First, both parties get everything off their chest, which they need to do anyway. Second, in the heat of argument, people often reveal the real issue, which is usually different from the surface issue. Third, sometimes they actually resolve it themselves when they're forced to work through it. Fourth, they learn that you won't rescue them from difficult conversations, which makes them more careful about picking fights. Your silence isn't passive, it's strategic. You're gathering information and letting natural consequences play out. Consider what happened with a department director named Catherine, who inherited a team with terrible dynamics. 3 senior members constantly undermined each other, meetings were battlegrounds, projects stalled because of internal politics. Her predecessor had tried everything, mediating every dispute, shuffling responsibilities, even formal disciplinary action. Nothing worked. Catherine took a radically different approach in her first team meeting when the bickering started. She said nothing. She simply sat back and watched. The argument escalated. People looked at her expectantly, waiting for her to intervene. She remained silent, taking notes. After 15 uncomfortable minutes, the argument lost steam. People started feeling foolish. The meeting ended awkwardly. The next morning, Catherine met with each person individually. She didn't lecture. She didn't take sides. She simply played back what she'd observed. She asked each person, "Is this how you want to be seen by your colleagues?" She let them sit with that question. Then she explained her new policy. She would no longer referee disputes if they had conflicts. They needed to resolve them directly or bring her a jointly agreed solution. She would facilitate discussions but not impose answers. The team was shocked. They'd expected her to fix everything, like her predecessor tried to do. Within 30 days, the dynamics shifted completely. The constant bickering stopped because there was no audience for it. People started having direct conversations because they had no other choice. Problems got solved faster because team members couldn't escalate everything to Catherine. She'd broken their dependency on leadership intervention by refusing to play that role. Her silence had forced them to develop the capability they'd never needed before. This is the paradox of leadership silence. By saying less, you develop more capable people. By solving fewer problems, you create better problem solvers. By letting uncomfortable situations play out, you build teams that can handle discomfort. Your silence isn't weakness or absence. It's the intentional creation of space where others must step up. It's the deliberate choice to develop capability instead of dependency. It's the recognition that your job isn't to have all the answers. Your job is to build a team that can find answers without you. That's what separates managers who create bottlenecks from leaders who create momentum. Knowledge without application is worthless. You can understand every principle of strategic silence and still fail completely if you don't implement it systematically. This isn't something you can decide to do when it's convenient. It requires deliberate practice, conscious effort, and a commitment to changing patterns you've reinforced for years. The good news is that, like any skill, you can develop it through consistent practice. The bad news is that most people won't do the work because it feels uncomfortable at first. That discomfort is exactly why it's valuable. Anything that feels easy doesn't create competitive advantage. Start with your mornings. Before you check your phone, before you turn on the news, before you engage with anyone, spend 15 minutes in complete silence. Not meditation in the mystical sense, not some elaborate spiritual practice, just sitting quietly with your thoughts. No input, no output, just silence. This trains your brain to be comfortable with quiet. Most people are addicted to constant stimulation. They wake up and immediately flood their minds with information, opinions, and noise. Then they wonder why they're reactive all day. Your morning silence builds your capacity to choose response over reaction. It's like going to the gym for your self-control. During this morning practice, focus on your breathing and observe your thoughts without engaging them. Thoughts will come, let them pass. Don't argue with them, don't develop them. Just watch them like clouds moving across the sky. This simple practice does something profound. It teaches you that you are not your thoughts. You are the observer of your thoughts. This distinction is critical for leadership because it means you don't have to react to every thought that crosses your mind. You can observe an angry thought without acting on it. You can notice a defensive impulse without following it. This is the foundation of strategic silence. Now apply this to your daily conversations. Set a specific goal. In every conversation today, you will listen twice as long as you speak. This sounds simple, but try it and you'll realize how difficult it actually is. Count to 3 before responding to anything. Not 1, not 2, but 3 full seconds. Time yourself if you have to. Those 3 seconds will feel eternal at first. You'll be convinced the other person thinks you're slow or confused. Push through that discomfort. What you're actually communicating is that you think before you speak, which is increasingly rare and therefore increasingly valuable. Practice the power question technique. Instead of offering your opinion or solution, ask a question and then stay silent. The question should be open-ended, not yes or no, something that requires thought. What do you think is driving this problem? Or how would you approach this situation? Or what outcome are you hoping to achieve? Then comes the critical part after you ask. Stop talking. Let the silence stretch. Let it become uncomfortable. Let the other person struggle to formulate their answer. Every second of that silence is them developing their thinking. Every moment you resist filling that silence is you building their capability. Track your speaking to listening ratio for 1 week. Be brutally honest in meetings, in one-on-one conversations, in casual interactions. Are you speaking more than 50% of the time? If so, you're talking too much. Most people dramatically overestimate how much they listen and underestimate how much they speak. Record yourself in a meeting if you can. Watch it back. Count the minutes you spend talking versus listening. The results will shock you once you have accurate data. You can set real improvement goals. Week 1, reduce your speaking by 20%. Week 2, another 20%. By week 4, you should be speaking no more than 30% of the time in most interactions in written communication. Practice silence by building in delay. When someone sends you an email that triggers you emotionally, do not respond immediately. Save it as a draft. Walk away. Come back 2 hours later. Reread what they wrote. Reread what you wrote. Edit out everything emotional. Strip it down to facts and forward movement. You'll be amazed how different your response looks after that cooling off period. This practice alone will save your career multiple times. The emails you don't send are often more valuable than the ones you do. Phone and video calls require different silence tactics. On calls, resist the urge to fill every pause with words when you're presenting information. Pause between major points. Give people time to absorb what you've said before moving to the next idea. When someone asks you a question, take a visible breath before answering. This signals that you're thinking, not just reacting. In video meetings, being comfortable with silence on camera demonstrates remarkable confidence. While everyone else rushes to fill dead air, you can sit calmly, project competence through your body language, and speak only when you have something worth saying. Here's where people often get this wrong. They confuse strategic silence with being withdrawn or passive-aggressive. Strategic silence is engaged. You're making eye contact, you're leaning in, your body language shows you're present and interested. You're taking notes, you're nodding at key points. You're actively listening, not checked out. Passive-aggressive silence is different. It's the cold shoulder. It's refusing to communicate as punishment. It's withholding information to maintain power. That's not leadership. That's manipulation. Learn the difference and never cross that line. Cultural considerations matter here. In some cultures, extended silence is normal and comfortable. In others, it's seen as awkward or even rude. You need to calibrate your approach based on context. But here's the key. Even in cultures where constant conversation is the norm, thoughtful pauses still command respect, even where quick responses are expected. A brief moment of consideration still elevates your credibility. Adapt to your environment, but don't abandon the principle. Your action plan starts today. This week, implement the 3-second pause before every response. Just that one thing. Don't try to change everything at once. Master the pause. Next week, add the morning silence practice, 15 minutes every day, no exceptions. Week 3, start tracking your speaking to listening ratio and consciously reduce your talk time. Week 4, implement the power question technique in every meeting you attend, backwards by week 6. These practices should start feeling natural instead of forced. By week 12, people will notice you've changed, even if they can't articulate exactly how. The timeline for seeing results varies. Some changes happen immediately, the first time you pause 3 seconds before responding in a tense situation. You'll notice the dynamic shift. Other benefits accumulate over months. Your reputation as someone thoughtful and measured builds gradually. People start seeking your input specifically because they know you don't waste words. Opportunities come to you because you're perceived as someone who can handle pressure without panic. Here's the bottom line. Every conversation is a choice. You can fill the space with words, or you can create space with silence. You can react immediately or respond thoughtfully. You can prove you're smart by talking or demonstrate wisdom by listening. The path you choose determines whether you remain where you are or rise to where you want to be. Strategic silence isn't about being quiet. It's about being powerful. It's about controlling the narrative by controlling yourself. It's about leading through presence rather than noise, starting right now. In your very next conversation, you have the opportunity to apply these principles. The question isn't whether this works. The question is whether you'll actually do it. Your future is determined by that choice.